I take it everyone is sufficiently refilled.
Oh, yes, Monty.
No, do go on, Monty.
Yes, do. Is this where things get utterly foul and horrid?
This is indeed where events begin to take a darker turn. A considerable space in Dr. Baines's journals, or as I should perhaps now say, Archdeacon Baines's journals, is occupied with exclamations upon the confusion in which Archdeacon Poultry had left the business of his office. His successor's investigation of the rights and duties of his office were very searching and businesslike, and there is a calculation in one place that a period of 3 years will just suffice to set the business of the Archdeaconry upon a proper footing. And this estimate appears to have been an exact one. For just 3 years he is occupied in reforms. Hitherto, his duties have precluded him from more than an occasional attendance at the cathedral services. Now he begins to take an interest in the fabric of the building and the music. There are reports of his largely unsuccessful struggles with the organist, an old gentleman, Felix Treasurer, who had been in office for many, many years.
Enter. Mr. Treasurer, so glad you could come.
So glad you could come. So glad you could come, says he. I'm surprised I can still come after all of this disorder and discombobulation these so-called reforms of yours have brought to my organ. Begging your pardon, Archdeacon.
Mr. Treasurer, I can assure you these reforms of mine are entirely dedicated to order and fully necessary to put the cathedral's future back on a sure footing, including the future of your organ. Now, I wish to discuss your choice of hymn settings.
And what's wrong with them tunes now then? As organist, I have the discretion to set upon my organ whatever I like. Not even my wife has the power to tell me what I may or may not set upon my organ. Not that she's touched my organ in years. Of that I can be reasonably sure. But that's beside the point, begging your pardon, Archdeacon.
Yes. It's not your choice of music that is the issue, Mr. Treasurer. It is rather the sentiments of the text that you seem willfully determined to set.
I don't know what you mean, sir.
Oh, I think you do. Last Sunday, I believe the congregation were treated to, yes, I have it here. O Lord, kick in the teeth of evil men.
Very proud of that one I am, very proud indeed, sir. All good Christian sentiments there, and good and violent too. Playing very much to our target demographic, one might say.
Might one? And what is our target demographic?
Thick as pig shit. And fearful, sir. Keeps the little baskets in order. Has a lovely alto line too, very uplifting.
Is it? Is it? As uplifting perhaps as last evensong's, here we are. The man who does a horrid deed shall have his balls ripped off by goats.
Oh, that's even more uplifting, I should say. That one has a descant, boy soprano, sir. Lovely fach he has, as our Prussian cousins would say, sir.
Has he? Has he? Well, I'm sure you'll be delighted to be singing tonight this little wonder of yours. The man whose sins remain unseen, with hedgehogs doth God ram his bum?
It's got a very rousing chorus, that one, sir. In E sharp major.
Delightful. Christmas is approaching, Mr. Treasurer, and far be it from a humble archdeacon to tell a mighty organist his job.
Well, sir, my organ is pretty mighty.
I'm sure it is. But perhaps a more joyful tone, one perhaps, dare I suggest it, of forgiveness might be in order for the festive season.
Well, sir, that's why I've prepared this for the first Sunday in Advent, sir.
Ding dong merrily on high, God wield torn cocks like clappers. Mr. Treasurer?
Yes, Archdeacon?
Sod off.
Very good, Archdeacon.
More to the purpose is Archdeacon Baines' sudden growth of enthusiasm for the cathedral itself and its furniture. There is a draft of a letter to an architectural periodical, which I do not think was ever sent, describing the stalls in the choir. These were of fairly late date, of about the year 1700, and clearly quite compelling, judging from Archdeacon Baines' remarks, which, to summarize, run thus. The Archdeacon's stall, situated at the south-east end, west of the episcopal throne, is distinguished by some curious ornamentation. In addition to the arms of Dean Whoopsie, by whose efforts the whole of the internal furniture of the choir was completed, the prayer desk is terminated at the eastern extremity by 3 small but remarkable statuettes in the grotesque manner. One is an exquisitely modelled figure of a cat, whose crouching posture suggests with admirable spirit the suppleness, vigilance, and craft of the redoubted adversary of the genus mouse, and perhaps also the need to wilfully piss up its owner's legs. Both interpretations seem possible. Opposite to this is a figure seated upon a throne, yet invested with the attributes of foolery. But it is no earthly jester whom the carver had sought to portray. His form is studiously concealed by the long tailcoat in which he is draped. But the hat which he wears does not suffice to hide the wild hair and mad, staring eyes which betray his lunatic origin. More disconcerting, though, is what the seated figure holds within the folds of his mantle. He seems to cradle a bird, but not a bird like any I have seen, large and ragged, with long, moth-eaten plumage that in the rendering of this artist's chisel seems to suggest not feathers, but a matted, tatty rug. The joints of its legs look almost comical, knots rather than knees, yet those legs terminate in talons of horrifying length and sharpness. Its beak is curled in upon itself, like a snarl of malice no earthly bird could surely imitate, and suggests a punching fist. This most unnatural avian horror is cradled beneath the figure's right arm, which, most curious of all, despite the quite terrifying realism with which the sculptor was able to endow the oak of these grotesques in totality, appears paradoxically fake and somehow artificial. Finally, betwixt these two figures stands a shape muffled in a long mantle. This might at first sight be mistaken for a monk or friar of orders grey, for the head is cowled and a knotted cord depends from somewhere about the waist. A slight inspection, however, will lead to a very different conclusion. The knotted cord is quickly seen to be a halter, held by a hand all but concealed within the draperies, whilst the sunken features, horrid to relate, the ancient flesh upon the cheekbones proclaims the king of terrors. Or perhaps some form of tedious old fart. Who can tell? But there do appear to be, poking out from beneath the hem of his mantle, no, surely it could not be. Not carpet slippers. Archdeacon Baines concludes by noting that these figures are evidently the production of no unskilled chisel, and seeing that the woodwork in question has now disappeared, it holds considerable interest. But to return to Dr. Baines' career, it is to be gathered from his diaries, those of his first 3 years of hard and careful work show him in high spirits. After that, as time goes on, I see a shadow coming over him, destined to develop into utter blackness, which I cannot but think must have been reflected in his outward demeanour. He remained unmarried, and his sister was not always with him, distracted as she often was by her innumerable and fast-changing causes. The Archdeacon therefore commits a good deal of his fears and troubles to his diary, There was no other outlet for his insane, bile-filled ramblings, as the Daily Mail would not open its letters column until 1896. But in those diaries, I am much mistaken if Archdeacon Baines has told us all that he might have told. A series of extracts shall be given.
August 30th, 18 Squingley Squange. The days begin to draw in more perceptibly than ever. Now that the archdeaconry papers are reduced to order, I must find some further employment for the evening hours of autumn and winter. It is a great blow that Letitia's causes will not allow her to stay through these months. Well, Letitia, that was an excellent kipper this morning.
But, Johnny, you haven't asked me what I'm doing today.
Yes, indeed. What are you doing today?
I am most glad you asked unprompted. I am packing for my autumn away in Manchester to attend the rallies of the Society for Women's Suffrage. I shall be representing Tarchester and Hackingforth, of course.
Of course. You must have your little... You're doing what, Letitia?
There is nothing wrong with a lady possessing causes, and the cause of women's suffrage is the finest one to which I have cleaved this month alone. It surely will not be denied that women have, and ought to have, opinions of their own on subjects of public interest and on the events which arise as the world wends on its way. But if it be granted that women may, without offence, hold political opinions, on what ground can the right be withheld of giving the same expression or effect to their opinions as that enjoyed by their male neighbours?
Letitia, are you sure you wish to go away on such a radical endeavour? I mean, the house will be so empty without a single other human soul within it.
But I shall be here, sir.
Oh, do be quiet, Nancy.
Oh, Johnny, listen. The life of a suffragist is quite the way forward. There is nothing so fine as heckling politicians, trying to storm Parliament, being attacked and sexually assaulted during battles with the police. Imagine it, dear Johnny, the incalculable freedom of chaining oneself to railings and other ladies. Smashing windows, carrying out nationwide bombing and arson campaigns, and facing anger and ridicule in the print media every single week. Imprisonment, hunger strike, force feedings, gaggings, and throwing oneself before the royal horses, and in the name of all women being permitted a voice.
Oh, let me vote for horses too, Ma'am.
Oh, do be quiet, Nancy.
Yes, whatever makes you happy, Letitia. September 15th. Letitia has left me for Manchester. October 11th. Candles lit in the choir for the first time at evening prayers. It came as a shock. I find that I absolutely shrink from the dark season. November 17th. Much struck by the character of the carving on my desk. I do not know I'd ever noticed it carefully before. My attention was called to it by accident. During the Magnificat I was, I regret to say, almost overcome with sleep. My hand was resting on the back of the carved figure of a cat, which is the nearest to me of the three figures at the end of my stall. I was not aware of this, for I was not looking in that direction until I was startled by what seemed to be a softness. There was a feeling as of rather rough and coarse fur, and a sudden movement as if the creature were twisting round its head to bite me, or perhaps do something more unspeakable. It was then I felt curiously warm in my lap. Ah!
Bloody hell, Archdeacon, keep it down!
My apologies, Mr. Treasurer. Ladies, soupçon too much communion wine, I fancy. I regained my composure quickly. However, the impression of the unpleasant feeling was so strong that I found myself rubbing my hand upon my surplice to check for dampness, but there was none, although the most persistent acrid smell has remained in my trousers for days afterwards. This accident led me to examine the carved figures after prayers more carefully than I'd done before, and I realized for the first time with what hideous skill they are executed.
From this point onwards, Dr. Baines took an increased interest in investigating the origins of the choir stall carvings.
Good afternoon, Reverend Cartfast.
Good morning, Archdeacon Baines.
Yes, so it is. The light fades so quickly in this season. It's difficult sometimes to... I am most gratified you should spare an hour to meet me on this highly inclement day. We could have met at your rectory.
Oh, not at all, Archdeacon. I find the snow is quite bracing. Besides, what you wish to discuss falls fully within the boundaries of this, my humble parish. And so, would you care for a hackberry?
No, thank you. I'm trying to give them up. Doctor's orders.
Pity. A pity. You don't mind if I cut one down, do you?
Oh, please. I know we're martyrs for it in Tarchester.
Thank you. I find them very warming on a day like this. Timber! Oh, that's pleasant. Got a filthy habit. Filthy habit. Now, it were about the choir stalls, weren't it?
Yes. Some late researchers among the chapter accounts have shown me that the carvings of the stalls were not, as is very usually reported, the works of hashish-crazed Dutch artists, but were executed by a native of this very city or district.
Indeed. His name was Roddle. An entirely locally grown nutbag. Lived in a windmill, you know.
What a needlessly Gothic affectation.
You wouldn't say that if you saw the colour he painted it.
Excuse me?
Nothing. He were a very queer fellow by all accounts.
And what were those accounts?
Oh, old wives' tales. Well, tales, probably. What I can tell you for certain, though, the timber for those stalls was procured from an oak copse in the vicinity, the property of the dean and chapter, known back then as Holywood.
Holywood? My, how portentous.
Yes, well, certain traditions still lingered amongst the local inhabitants back then. Anyway, great size and age of oaks was required to furnish the materials of the stately structures of the stalls. So, there were one in particular which stood near the centre of the grove, and my father said it was known as the Hanging Oak. The propriety of that title was confirmed by the fact that a quantity of human bones was found in the soil about its roots. I do remember that. And at certain times of the year, it was the custom for those who wished to secure a successful issue to their affairs, whether in marriage, harvest, indecently propositioning goats, you know, the ordinary business of rural life. Anyway, to that end, they would suspend from its boughs small images or puppets, rudely fashioned, of course, in straw, twigs, shite, any of the light rustic materials. Although the goat-buggering ones were surprisingly detailed, as I recall.
Like pagan offerings. Did Mr. Roddle create renderings of such horrors?
In wood, yes, a damn hand he had with wood. Or, so I've been led to believe.
I've never really warmed much to puppets. They always struck me as a childish kind of idolatry. So where was the scene of this marionette horror?
Oh, you're right, innit?
Excuse me?
I'd say you're at the centre of it.
What do you mean?
Well, the Grove, Holywood. Well, this is it. Or what remains of it.
Yes, I see.
In fact, I'd estimate you're standing right where the old hanging oak used to grow. I'd wager there are yet some bones beneath the snow of your feet.
Yes, I'll wager that too.
Was there anything else, Archdeacon?
So much for the Archdeacon's archaeological investigations. We continue with his diary.
December 6th. I do indeed miss Letitia's company. The evenings, after I've worked as long as I can at my defence, are very trying. The house is too large for a lonely man, and the visitors of any kind are too rare. I get an uncomfortable impression when going to my room that there is company of some kind. The fact is, I may as well formulate it to myself, that I hear voices.
This, as I'm sure regular listeners to these shows are well aware, is a common symptom of incipient decay of the brain. Now read on.
However, there is nothing in my family's mental history to give colour to such an idea. Work, diligent work, and a punctual attention to the duties which befall me is my best remedy. That, or perhaps indulging in quite inordinate quantities of the vilest pornography. Either way, I shall have little doubt it will prove efficacious. January 1st. I have gone blind. Oh. No, just getting dark, that's all. I must confess it. I find the darkness increasing upon me these months. Last night, upon my return after midnight from the deanery, I lit my candle to go upstairs. I was nearly at the top when something whispered to me.
Let me wish you a happy new year, Curate Baines.
I could not be mistaken. That voice! It spoke distinctly and with a peculiar emphasis. Had I dropped my candle, as I all but did, I trembled to think what the consequences must have been. As it was, I managed to get up the last flight and was quickly in my room. With the door locked, I experienced no further disturbance. January 15th. I had occasion to come downstairs last night to my workroom for my watch, which I had inadvertently left on my table when I went up to bed. I think I was at the top of the last flight when I had a sudden impression of a sharp whisper in my ear.
Taken care, cocky.
I clutched the balusters and naturally looked around at once. Of course, there was nothing. After a moment, I went on. It was no good turning back, but I had, as nearly possible, fallen. Just then, a cat, a large one by the feel of it, slipped between my feet. It may have been the kitchen cat, but I do not think it was, as, again, I saw nothing, although I did hear something further. February 27th. A curious thing last night, which I should like to forget. Perhaps if I put it down here, I may see it in its true proportion. I worked in the library from about 9 to 10, finishing cataloguing my eccentric predecessor's European halberd collection. The hall and staircase seemed to be unusually full of what I can only call movement without form. By this I mean there seemed to be continuous going and coming, and that whenever I ceased writing to listen or looked into the hall, the stillness was absolutely unbroken. It so happened that night I had told Nancy to come to my room for the letter to the bishop, which I wished to have delivered early in the morning. So she was to sit up, therefore, and come for it when she heard me retire. I was winding up my watch when I heard something unusual at the door.
May I come in, cocky?
Certainly, come in. I said come in. Wretched cloth-eared domestic. I said... No one, however, answered my summons. And it was now that, as I strongly suspect, I committed an error, for as I held out the letter intended for the bishop, I noticed there was certainly no one at that moment in the passage. But in the instant of my standing there, the door opened at the far end, and Nancy appeared from her room, carrying a candle and smoothing down her apron. Nancy!
Dear God in heaven, I wasn't doing anything, I tell you.
Nancy, what are you prattling on about, girl?
Well,
Have you been knocking?
Oh, sir, I do apologise. I thought I found a rat. Yes, a rat in my bed, and I started repeatedly. which may have caused a regular and rhythmic slamming of my bedstead against the wall. There was no other reason for the banging, sir, I swear it.
What? No, I mean, have you been knocking on my door, girl?
No, sir, I haven't been past your door for over an hour.
Are you sure?
Quite sure. I've been in my room, otherwise engaged.
Ah, yes. I see you've had your candle to hand, been reading the good book, eh?
Yes, that'll do. You keep thinking that, sir. Oh, I see you have your letter for the bishop, sir.
Oh, indeed. You can take that now.
Anything else, sir, before I may retire for the evening?
No, you haven't seen or heard anyone else in the house, I mean?
No, sir. It's just you and I, sir.
Yes. Yes, of course. Good night. Oh, and,
Do be quiet, Nancy.
there's a good girl.
With the return of spring, when his sister came to live with him again for some months, Dr. Baines' entries become more cheerful.
Well, Letitia, that was an excellent bloater this morning.
But, Johnny, you haven't asked me what I'm doing today.
Yes, indeed. What are you doing today?
I am most glad you asked unprompted. I am leaving for Brighton to a women's retreat arranged by the Ladies' Sapphic Association, Tarchester and Hackingforth branch, of course.
Of course, you must have your The what, Letitia?
There is nothing wrong with a lady possessing causes, and the cause of women's lesbianism is the finest one to which I've cleaved this week alone.
Oh, I'm quite sure of that.
Oh, Johnny, listen. The life of a bull dyke is quite the way forward. There is nothing so fine as a young, healthy woman with a stick-on moustache and a monocle, engaged in furious acts of rumpy-pumpy with her sapphic sisters. Imagine it, dear Johnny, the incalculable freedom. I shall shave my head, purchase a wanky strap-on, and enlist in the Prussian army, where I shall live as a man, wed a debutante named Heidi, or possibly Olga, and attain a pension at the rank of lieutenant. What liberation could our sex achieve via the wonders of cross-dressing military lesbianism?
And I'm a lesbian too, Ma'am.
Oh, do be quiet, Nancy.
Yes. Whatever makes you happy, Letitia.
With Letitia's departure in early September, the archdeacon was again left alone, and now indeed there is evidence that he was incommoded again, and more pressingly. To this matter I will return in a minute, but I digress to put in a document which, rightly or wrongly, I believe to have a bearing on the thread of our story. The account books of Dr. Baines, preserved along with his other papers, show from a date a little later than that of his institution as archdeacon a quarterly payment of £25 to C.L. Nothing could have been made of this had it stood by itself, but I connect it with a very dirty and ill-written letter, which, like another that I have quoted, was in a pocket in the cover of the diary. It appears to run thus.
Dear Sir and Madam, delete as applicable. I have been expecting to hear of you these last weeks, and not having done so, must suppose you have not got my letter, which was saying how me and my man had met in with bad times this season due to him being found all dead like. And not in suspicious circumcisions at all. And what's more, what with how the bottom has fallen out of the otter punching business, all seems to go cross with us on the farm, and which way to look for the rent we have no knowledge of it. So, if he could find your way clear to meet me at the farm to discuss the matter, I would consider it a great condiment. Your obedient servant, hugs and kisses, smiley face, crayon picture of a dead weasel, Christina Lee.
Ah, Miss Lee, I believe you wish to discuss a matter.
Afternoon, your archdeaconess. So kind of you to come, sir.
Not at all, Miss Lee, not at all. The pleasure is all mine. I'm rather surprised, Miss Lee, you're keeping the cow out at this uncommonly cold time of year.
No, that's the thing, sir. That's the thing. You see, when he makes a promise to do a thing, in return for another thing, it is important that the body in question unfills their part of the bargain, like.
Yes, I fear I see where this is going.
Take Mrs. Moo here. Now, Mrs. Moo, remembering to continue to deliver milk throughout the year, is what keeps I remembering not to make her into, stew. Unfortunately, Mrs. Moo has been a bad cow and has quite forgot to unfill her requirements for these last 5 months. If he gets my drift, sir.
Yes, I think so.
Oh, that's good, sir, that's good. I would hate to have to force the point, sir. Oh, which reminds I, if he could just catch Mrs. Moo's tail, sir, and lift it up away.
What, like that, you mean?
Oh, that's right, Archdeacon. Just hold it up there while I pops in the blasting gelignite.
If you're doing this for my benefit, I can assure you...
Oh, hardly, sir, no. We'll just light the touch paper. And we think it's best to retire, Archdeacon.
What? Oh, yes, of course. Nothing seems to have... should we possibly check?
Oh, no, sir. Didn't your mother not teach you? You should never return to a cow once it's lit.
Ah, yes, I suppose. Well,
There we go. Now, your Archdeaconess, if you would have the great liberality to send £40 in unused, non-sequentially numbered trees to my wood merchant, otherwise steps will have to be took which I should not wish. Well, I might wish, but I suspect you would not wish. Just like Mrs. Moo did not wish.
I see.
And, as you was the means of me losing my place with Dr. Poultry, I think it is only just what I am asking, and you know best what I could say if I was put to it, but I do not wish anything of that unpleasant nature, being one that always wished to have everything pleasant about me, just like chickens do, right up until their heads are pulled off.
Would a cheque be acceptable?
I prefers cash.
About the time which I suppose this letter to have been written, there is indeed a payment of £40 in used rosewood to C.L. We continue with Archdeacon Baines' diary.
October 22nd. At evening prayers during the Psalms, I had that same experience which I recollect from last year. I was resting my hand on one of the carved figures, as before. I usually avoid that of the cat now, and I was going to have said a change came over it, but that seems attributing too much importance to what must, after all, be due to some physical affection in myself. At any rate, the wood seemed to become chilly and soft, as if it were made of wet linen. I can assign the exact moment at which I became sensible of this, for the choir were just beginning to sing the interminable word set wilfully by Mr. Treasurer, "The naughty man who does bad things."
The naughty man who does bad things shall soon be punished. The Lord will surely have his way and strike the bugger dead. But first God wants that man to rule each nasty thing he tried to do, and cause him such distress. His trousers he will mess, his crops will wilt, his goats go dry, his cows explode and surely die. There'll be naught he can do. his horse shall turn to gloom. The wicked man who thinks he's won shall meet a grim repulse. The Lord will bring that fiend to book and prove to him his loss. Thus demons come as flightless birds, they'll maul his face, drop great big turds, and make man's life a hell. With every horrid smell, God fills his pants with fiery ants, then rats and bats and peeing cats. There's naught man can do. They'll bite his bits in two. Those salty bits, those sinful bits, far naughtier than ladies' tits. Those are naughty too. They shan't be bitten too. His mortal sins, that dreadful man, he shall forever rue. Flames bite his bits in two. Bits in two.
The whispering in my house was more persistent tonight. I seemed not to get rid of it in my room. I have not noticed this before. A nervous man, which I am not, and hope I am not becoming, would have been much annoyed, if not alarmed by it. The cat was on the stairs again tonight. I think it urinates there always, but there is no kitchen cat. November 15th. Here again I must note a matter I do not understand. I am much troubled in sleep. No definite image presented itself, but I was pursued by the very vivid impression that old cracked lips were whispering into my ear with great emphasis for some time.
There's somebody at the door. There's somebody at the door. There's somebody.
Eventually, I fell asleep. But I was awakened with a start by a feeling as if a hand were laid upon my shoulder. A hand, or was it an enormous beak? To my intense alarm, I found myself standing at the top of the lowest flight of the first staircase. The moon was shining brightly enough through the large window to let me see there was a large cat on the second or third step. I braced myself for what I knew would surely come. I can make no comment. I crept up to bed again. I do not know how. Yes, mine is a soggy burden.
Then follows a line or two which has been scratched out. I fancy I read something like, acted for the best, couldn't get the stains out, glad I arranged for the bugger to be brutally killed, or some other impenetrable, meaningless rambling. Who can tell? Not long after this, it is evident to me that the archdeacon's firmness began to give way under the pressure of these repeated phenomena. I omit as unnecessarily painful and distressing the ejaculations and prayers which, in the months of December and January, appear for the first time and become increasingly frequent. He did occasionally seek to palliate his fears by inviting visitors to his house.
January 7th, I have prevailed upon my cousin Alan to give me a few days, and he is to occupy the chamber next to mine. Ah, Alan, did you get a good night's sleep?
Not bad, Johnny, not bad. Kept up a bit by the wind.
Ah, sorry about that. Must have a word with Nancy about serving beans at dinner.
And yourself, sleep well?
My own experiences were, as before, whispering and whispering. What is it that he wants to say? Who is at the door?
What was that?
Nothing.
Well, yes, this is a very noisy house, and that cat of yours is an unusually large and fine specimen, but very wild, I fancy. I take it that's why everything here smells entirely of piss.
Ah, yes. Sorry about that. I'll reprimand the maid.
Oh, does she spray too?
Well, she is a lesbian.
Ah, yes, that might explain it, you see. Dash tricky things, lesbians. Does she also walk about the landings a lot at night?
Excuse me?
Oh, no, it is just that I just seem to keep seeing a figure in a long frock always passing by.
What, colour robe was she wearing? White or, grey?
Oh, grey. Yes, definitely grey.
I supposed it would be so.
Apart from the tartan carpet slippers. That is.
January 11th. Alan left me today. I must be firm.
These words, "I must be firm," occur again and again on subsequent days. Sometimes they are the only entry. In these cases, they are in an unusually large hand and dug into the paper in a way which must have broken the pen that wrote them. Apparently, the archdeacon's friends did not remark in any change in his behavior, which gives me a high idea of his courage and determination. The diary tells us nothing more than I have indicated of the last days of his life. The end of it all must be told in the polished language and wax cylinder of Matthias Thringe's spirited obituary notice.
The morning of the 26th of February was cold and tempestuous. At an early hour, the maid had occasion to go into the front hall of the residence, occupied by the lamented subject of these lines. What was her horror upon observing the form of her beloved and respected master lying upon the landing of the principal staircase in an attitude which inspired the gravest fears. Assistance was procured, and an universal consternation was experienced upon the discovery that Archdeacon Baines had been the object of a brutal and a murderous attack. There's somebody at the door. There's somebody at the door. There's somebody at the door.
Oh, for God's sake! I can't take any more of this! Where are you? Who are you? Why are you doing this? Show yourselves! I demand it!
Oh dear, Emu thinks you've been a very bad archdeacon, don't you, Emu? No, Emu, don't, leave him alone, no.
Murder that bloody bird! Ah!
Oh. Now you right down there, cocky? Oh, look, Archdeacon. A lovely little pussycat. Perhaps he'll be in friends with you. Oh, that's nice, pussycat. He likes you. Come on, Emu. Let's go back to the inn windmill and sing a lovely little song about an English walnut now, shall we? The Archdeacon's vertebral column was fractured in more than one place. This might have been the result of a fall. It appears that the stair carpet was loosened at one point and sodden with inordinate quantities of feline urine and avian excrement. But, in addition to this, there were injuries inflicted upon the eyes, nose, and mouth, as if by the beak of some huge and savage bird, which, dreadful to relate, rendered those features almost unrecognizable. The author or authors of this mysterious outrage are likely to remain buried in mystery.
Thringe goes on to reflect upon the probability that these sinful writings of Mr. Shelley, Lord Byron, and ladies may have been instrumental in bringing about the disaster, and concludes by hoping, somewhat vaguely, that this event may operate as an example to the rising generation of the terrible lewdness of staircases. I had already formed the conclusion that Dr. Baines was responsible for the death of Dr. Poultry, but the incident connected with the carved figure upon the archdeacon's stool was a very perplexing feature. The conjecture that it had been cut out of the wood of the hanging oak was not difficult, but seemed impossible to substantiate. However, I recently paid a visit to Tarchester, where I was introduced by one of the canons to the curator of the local museum. Mrs. Cresswell, isn't it? What a delightful museum you have here.
Professor Jim, thank you. Thank you indeed. Now, it was the carved figures and arms formerly on the Tarchester choir stalls that were the subject of your visit, wasn't it?
Quite. Indeed, please call me Monty, dear lady. I was just curious if any of the carvings had survived. I had read accounts of them being quite, realistic in nature. 3 in particular.
Well, I can show you the arms of Dean Whoopsie and some other fragments, but I suspect you are referring to those which used to adorn the Archdeacon's prayer desk. This way.
Yes, exactly so, my dear. Used to.
Well, there was an old resident hereabouts who once owned a carved figure, perhaps one of those. There was a very odd thing about that figure, he said. The old man told me he picked it up in a wood yard, had taken it home for his children. On the way home, he was fiddling about with it and it came in two in his hands, and a bit of paper dropped out. Noticing there was writing on it, he put it into his pocket and subsequently into a vase on his mantelpiece. Now, I was at his house not very long ago and happened to pick up the vase and turn it over to see whether there were any marks on it, and the paper fell out into my hand. Seeing this, the old man told me the story and said I might keep the paper. It was crumpled and rather torn, so I mounted it on a card. I think I have it here. If you can tell me what it all means, I shall be very glad.
Thank you, my dear. Well, let us see now. The paper appears quite legibly inscribed, an old hand, mind. When I grew in the wood, I was watered with blood. Now in the church I stand. He that touches me with his hand, if a bloody hand he bear, I counsel him to beware, lest he be fetched away, whether by night or day, but chiefly when the wind blows high, in a night of February. This I dreamt, 26th of February, A.D. 1699, Roddle and Emu.
I suppose it's a charm or a spell. Wouldn't you call it something like that?
Yes, I suppose one might. What became of the figure in which it was concealed?
Oh, I forgot. The old man told me the one with the bird was so ugly and frightened his children so much that he burnt it.
And that, I sincerely hope, is the conclusion of the tale. It would appear Christmas Day has arrived.
Merry
Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas. Yes, a Merry Christmas to you all, my dear boys. So that, I fear, is the end of my storytelling. Until next Christmas Eve, that is, perhaps.
Hurrah!
Huzzah!
Right now, who's for gluing the bursar into an armchair?
Oh, me, Monty!
Yes, me too.
And dressing up in a culturally inappropriate manner.
Yes, burnt cork and towels all round.
And so, our story ends with Professor Montague Rhodes Jim once again engaged happily in wild acts of unconvincing cultural appropriation and enforced faunophilia with his young, pretty, and drunken students. And if that doesn't sum up the true spirit of Christmas, well, I don't know what an effective nativity play is all about. Good night! The Stalls of Tarchester was a shameless piece of paper-thin tosh, lovingly ripped off from M.R. James' far superior original and filled with tatty jokes by D.A. Gooding. The performance featured Damien Bell, Darren Gooding, Dave Hughes and Sarah Ellen Young. Music by Darren Tansley and Tina Gooding. Sound effects and mixing by Stuart Armitage. Directed by Darren Gooding, the show was recorded at Colchester Arts Centre and is an I Hear Voices Theatre Company production.